In Tower Defense Simulator, support towers are arguably some of the most important towers in the game. Instead of directly contributing damage, they aid your towers, either slowing down enemies, increasing your tower's fire rate, or more. Many towers fall under the category of support, so for this video, I'll be ranking all of them from worst to best, reviewing aspects like their value and how helpful their support is. I'll also be considering their DPS, as of course that's an important aspect. Before I continue, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to join the Blue Hair Mafia. It helps me out a lot and I really appreciate it. Also, if you want to talk to me, suggest videos, or maybe even be in one, consider joining the Blue Head Mafia Discord. It's a great time, and I hope to see you there. In last place, we have the Freezer. The Freezer is able to temporarily freeze enemies in place, delaying their movement and allowing your other towers to have more time to attack them. At max level, the freeze effect lasts for 1.45 seconds and the Freezer shoots every 1.008 seconds. Despite the tower's horrible reputation, the stun can actually be kinda okay, especially when spamming the tower. It can aid in taking down enemies like the tank, or give you some extra time against slow tanky enemies. The Freezer also reduces the enemy's defense by 5% with each hit, which caps out at a 20% decrease in defense. While this may be helpful, in terms of DPS, the Freezer is just terrible. Until level 3, it literally has 0 DPS, and at max level, it has a DPS of 1.98 for a cost of 11,000 cash. That's a DPS cost ratio of 0.18 DPS per 1k spent. That is so unbelievably bad. I mean, for comparison, the Golden Scout has a DPS cost ratio of 8.3, which is 46 times better value. Obviously, the Freezer isn't meant to be used for its DPS. However, as you'll later see, there are plenty of towers that do the exact same thing as it, but actually have some decent DPS or other traits that make them better. It's because of this, and the fact that its support is not fantastic, that it ended up in last place. In 8th place, ahead of the Freezer, we have the Frost Blaster. The Frost Blaster is essentially the same thing as the Freezer, but a bit better. While its slow may be shorter, freezing enemies for 0.7 seconds and firing every 1.508 seconds, it makes up for this in the fact that it has some semi-decent DPS. At max level, it has a DPS of 23.21 for a total of 12,400 cash. That gives it a DPS cost ratio of 1.87. The level with the best value is level 3. It costs 2,900 cash and has a DPS of 9.95, which is a DPS cost ratio of 3.34 DPS per 1k spent. That's 18.5 times better value than the Freezer, and because of that, despite the fact that the Frost Blaster is slightly worse at stalling enemies, I think it's overall better. In 7th place, ahead of the Frost Blaster, is the Toxic Gunner. The Toxic Gunner is a quick burst attacking tower, which after level 2 applies a poison and slow effect to enemies. The Toxic Gunner is supposed to slow down enemies by 10% with each shot, stacking up to a total of a 50% slowdown. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. The slowdown is bugged, and it ends up not being nearly as strong as it says it is. While the exact slowdown isn't confirmed, it's somewhere around 1 to 2% per hit, maxing out at either 5 to 10%. Even so, a 10% slowdown is not terrible. Also, the Toxic Gunner has some surprisingly good value. The upgrade with the best value is a level 3 Toxic Gunner having a DPS of 11.62 DPS for a total of 2,550 cash. If you consider the poison damage, which is essentially a +1 damage per hit if you set the tower's targeting to random, the Toxic Gunner has a DPS of 17.43 and a DPS cost ratio of 6.84 DPS per 1k spent. That's actually really good value, and when combined with the slowdown effect, it makes the Toxic Gunner a pretty decent tower. While not amazing, it can make a pretty good addition to your loadout. In 6th place, ahead of the Toxic Gunner, we have the Warden. It attacks enemies with a baton, being able to temporarily stun them and deal critical hits. You may be surprised as to how low the Warden is on the list, so let me be clear. The Warden is a really good tower, however, I personally believe that the rest of the towers on this list outperform it. Despite that, let's take a look at what's good about the Warden. First of all, its DPS is significantly better than the Toxic Gunner. At max level, it has a DPS of 115.51 for a total of 20,600 cash. That gives it a DPS cost ratio of 5.607 DPS per 1k spent. While this is technically worse value than the Toxic Gunner, the fact that it can reach a much higher DPS is overall more useful. Also, the Warden is much better at stalling enemies. After level 3, the Warden stuns enemies with every hit for 2 seconds. Considering that this is a 100% stun versus a 5 to 10% slowdown, it is much more useful against fast enemies like the tank, which can be a common game ender. Also, the Warden attacks every 0.808 seconds, meaning it can stun a lot of enemies if you set it to random. Not to mention, the max level Warden is immune to stuns, which can be really useful. It also has no placement limit, meaning you can spam a bunch of them and get an insane amount of stunning and DPS. This coupled with the fact that it gets hidden detection at level 1, the Warden is a very solid tower. In 5th place, ahead of the Warden, we have the Electroshocker. Some of you might be surprised that I'm placing it ahead of the Warden, but hear me out. The Electroshocker is a very underrated tower. It attacks using a taser, and the electricity can damage multiple enemies at once. After level 4, it gains the ability to stun them. The max Electroshocker's attack can chain up to 8 different enemies, dealing 90 damage per hit, starting for 0.5 seconds, and dropping the defense of enemies by 1%. Because the Electroshocker fires every 2.508 seconds, that means it has a max DPS of 287.08. It costs a total of 23,525 cash, giving it a DPS cost ratio of 12.203, which is fantastic value. So, even without considering the stun or defense drop, the Electroshocker is already a really good tower. It can rack up some serious damage, and it's a great option against crowds of enemies. Adding this to the fact that it can stun up to 8 enemies at a time for 0.5 seconds and drops their defense stats, the Electroshocker is definitely a powerful tower. It also attacks flying enemies, which makes it the only tower in the game that can stun balloons. Unfortunately, it cannot see hiddens, and you're only able to place up to 4 of them, meaning that the max DPS you can achieve for the Electroshocker is 1148.32. That is still a pretty high max DPS. So while the placement limit of 4 is quite detrimental, I don't think it ruins the tower or makes it worse than the Warden. It's a fantastic tower with high DPS and great stunning. In 4th place, ahead of the Electroshocker, we got the Sledger. The Sledger functions a lot like the Warden, being a close range melee attacking tower that has the ability to freeze enemies in place. However, it has a few advantages that make it arguably better than the Warden and Electroshocker. I should remake this. First of all, when the Sledger attacks an enemy that is already frozen, it will deal 2 times as much damage. While the Warden does a similar thing, dealing 2 times damage every 3rd hit, the Sledger dealing extra damage against frozen enemies is much better. If you have just one Sledger, because the freeze time lasts longer than the Sledger's fire rate, it will essentially deal 2 times damage every other hit. They'll give a single target DPS of 59.62. While this is still lower than the Warden, the Sledger has another trait that gives it the upper hand. At max level, the Sledger is able to damage up to 4 enemies at once, giving it a significantly higher potential DPS and making it much better at stalling crowds of enemies. Because the Sledger's freeze causes crowds of enemies to stack up, we can assume it's on average hitting a maximum of 4 enemies per hit. That gives it 4 times as much DPS, or 298.1 DPS. It costs a total of 13,600 cash, giving it a DPS cost ratio of 21.92 DPS per 1k spent. That is just insane value, being by far the best out of any tower in this list. It also stuns enemies for 2 seconds, which is as long as the Warden. While it may have a slower swing rate, it makes up for this in the fact that it can stun 4 enemies at once. Unfortunately, the Sledger cannot see hiddens, and you can only place 6 of them, but its amazing value, high DPS, and great stalling capabilities makes it a fantastic tower. In 3rd place, ahead of the Sledger, we have the Medic. Unlike the previous towers in this list, the Medic cannot stall enemies or deal a great amount of DPS. However, it has 2 fantastic and unique abilities. First of all, at the end of each round, the Medic will heal your base, recovering a max of 10 HP at max level. If you're just trying to heal your base as much as possible, the best level for this is the level 0 Medic, as it will heal 5 HP a round for only 900 cash. In comparison, the max level Medic heals 10 HP for 15,600 cash. If you're just trying to heal your base, that's not worth the price increase. While the base healing can be very useful, that's definitely not the best thing about the Medic. You see, at max level, the Medic receives a unique ability. The Revive ability instantly removes all stuns from all towers within the range of the Medic. This is incredibly valuable, especially in special game modes where bosses constantly stun your towers. The time that your tower spends stunned greatly reduces the amount of damage you end up dealing, so being able to instantly remove the stun can be a game changer. Often in difficult game modes, the Medic is a must-have tower, and that's why I place it as the 3rd best support tower. Now, the 2 towers we have left are the DJ and Commander. While it's obvious that these towers will rank high, the choice between placing the DJ or Commander in 1st place is not an easy one to make. They both provide fantastic buffs to your tower, with the max DJ giving a 20% discount and a 35% range buff, and the max Commander giving a 25% passive fire rate buff or a whopping 55% buff when its ability is activated. The DJ and Commander are likely the most used towers in the game, and they give undoubtedly the best support out of any tower. But which one is better? Well, let's take a look at the DJ. While the 35% range buff is definitely a huge benefit, the DJ's most powerful buff is by far the 20% discount. Let's say you're playing a solo game and you want to place 40 golden minigunners. A max golden minigunner costs a total of 23,250 cash. 40 golden minigunners without the DJ will cost a total of 930,000 cash. With a maxed out DJ, 40 golden minigunners will cost a total of 744,000, saving you 186,000 cash. If you're playing in a game where you're struggling to get cash, you can think of the 20% discount as an extra 20% DPS that you will be able to afford. That means that the DJ is essentially granting you a 20% boost in DPS and a 35% boost in range. That's a pretty good deal for only 17,250 cash. However, this is exactly why the Commander is better. If you think of the DJ as a 20% boost in DPS, then the fact that the Commander's passive fire rate boost is 25% and its fire rate boost with its ability is 55%, it's pretty clear that the Commander is better. Also, some game modes like the Polluted Wastelands 2 give you an insane amount of cash, basically making a DJ not needed. But the commander's 55% fire rate boost will always be a huge benefit regardless of the situation. At the end of the day, your goal is to get as much DPS as possible, and because of this, I'm going to say the commander is the best support tower in the game. But what do you think? Is a DJ better? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And of course, remember, you can always just bring multiple support towers. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to join the Bluehead Mafia. My name is Corso, and I'll see y'all in the next video.